You find an old notebook sometimes, buried under things on a shelf. The kind you used to carry around when you still believed plans were something you made once and then kept. You open it without thinking, just to see what's inside, and you recognize the handwriting immediately, your own, but the words feel like they belong to someone you used to know. A trip you were going to take, a job you were going to leave for something else. A version of the next 5 years that made sense at the time and feels almost unrecognizable now. You close the notebook slowly and put it back, not because it hurts, just because there is nothing to do with it. That is the strange part about how expectations change. It is not usually painful. It does not arrive in a moment that breaks something open. It comes the way most things in adult life come. Gradually, almost invisibly, until one day you look up and notice the landscape is different, and you cannot remember when it shifted. You had a picture of your life. You were holding it in both hands. And then, somewhere between the ordinary days, the picture softened, the edges blurred, and the version of things you were walking toward quietly became something else without anyone announcing it. There are things you expected for yourself that no longer fit, not because they were wrong or foolish or too large, but because life moved in directions that required other things from you, and you moved with it. And the adjustments happened one at a time, each one small enough to absorb without stopping. A year passed, then another, and the person you once imagined becoming is still somewhere inside you, but the exact outline has changed. The way a familiar road changes when you haven't driven it in years. The turns are the same, the trees are different. It is still the same road, but it does not feel the way you remembered it feeling. This is not a story about disappointment. Disappointment implies something was promised. It implies there was a specific thing that should have been and wasn't. But expectations are not promises. They are shapes you build in your mind from the material of who you are at a particular time in your life. And as you change, as the material changes, the shapes change too, quietly, without ceremony, without anyone noticing. You are not left with a hole where the old expectation used to be. You are left with something quieter than that. A faint sense of distance between the version of things you imagined and the version you are living. Not a wound, just a gap. The kind you learn to stand in without falling. The notebook goes back on the shelf. The evening continues. You make something to eat or sit for a moment, or let your thoughts drift toward whatever comes next. And underneath all of it, there is something you are still learning to name. This quiet awareness that the life you are living is not quite the one you imagined, and that this does not mean something went wrong. It means something happened. It means you lived. It means the expectations were real once. And now something else is real, and between those two realities is the whole of everything that moved you from one to the other. Between those two realities is all the ordinary time that most people do not count. The mornings that looked like other mornings. The weeks that arrived and passed without announcing themselves as significant. You were not standing still during those years. You were moving through them, making small decisions, adjusting course in ways that felt natural in the moment, carrying the weight of each day without thinking of it as weight at all. And the expectations were adjusting alongside you, not breaking, not disappearing, just slowly reshaping themselves around what life was actually offering, the way water finds its way around stone without making a sound. When you were younger, The expectations had a quality of certainty to them that you did not notice at the time. They felt obvious, the way furniture in a familiar room feels obvious. Of course you would reach that place. Of course those things would happen. Of course the life you imagined had a reason to exist. Because you were imagining it. Because it was yours. Because the future is always easy to believe in when you have not yet had to negotiate with it. You held the picture lightly, the way you hold something you are sure you will not drop. And then the years happened, and you did not drop anything, but your hands changed, and the way you held things changed, and the picture was still there, only smaller now, or different in shape, or held in a different part of you than it used to be. Work took more than expected. Not in the way of catastrophe, just in the way of ordinary life accumulating. The hours of showing up, of doing what was needed, of getting through the week and then the next week, each one asking for something from you, each one leaving you with a little less certainty about where the extra energy was supposed to come from, and the expectations about what you would build or where you would be by a certain age began to soften. Not because they were abandoned, but because there was simply less room for them, and the room that was available was already full of everything the present required. Relationships changed the picture too. People arrived and stayed for a while, and then were somewhere else. Friendships that once felt like permanent architecture quietly became occasional. Love that was close became distant. Distance that was painful became familiar. And with each shift came a small renegotiation, a quiet conversation between who you thought life would be and what it was actually doing. You did not always notice these conversations happening. They occurred in the background of everything else, but looking back now, you can see that they were real, and that each one moved something. There were things you stopped mentioning, goals that you once brought up easily in conversation that you later kept to yourself, not because they had failed exactly, but because they no longer fit the same way in the life you were actually inside. A city you thought you would eventually move to. A creative thing you always imagined doing seriously. A relationship structure you believed was coming. You stopped mentioning these things and started carrying them privately, like small objects in a pocket that no one else knows are there, that you sometimes touch to remind yourself they exist. And yet you kept going. You kept making meals and answering messages and showing up to things and sleeping and waking up and doing it again. Because that is what the ordinary days require. They do not ask what you expected. They ask what you can give today, and you gave it. And the expectations continued their slow, quiet evolution, not into nothing, but into something different, something more worn, something that fits the body of the life you are actually living rather than the one you once imagined. There is something almost invisible about this process when you are inside it. You are not aware of the adjustments as they happen. You do not sit down one afternoon and decide to lower a bar or release a plan. It happens in the accumulation of small concessions, each one so reasonable in the moment that it requires no real grief, no formal acknowledgement. A year older, a little more tired, a little more aware of how much things cost, not just in money, but in time, in energy, in what you have to trade in order to get anywhere at all. The expectations bend to accommodate this reality, and you bend with them, and the bending is so gradual that you only notice it when you stop and compare where you are standing now to the picture you were holding years ago. And even then, the feeling is not always loss. Sometimes it is something closer to recognition, a quiet understanding that this is the life. Not the rehearsal for it, not the approach to it. This is the life, not the rehearsal for it. And when that understanding finally settles, not as a conclusion, but as a quiet arrival, something shifts in how you hold the distance between what you imagined and what is. The distance does not close, but you stop standing at one end of it and straining toward the other. You begin to simply exist inside it. And that is different. That is something other than disappointment or defeat. It is a form of arrival that does not look the way arriving was supposed to look, but is arrival nonetheless. What changes is not the expectations themselves, but your relationship to them. For a long time, they were targets, things you were moving toward, measures against which each year was being quietly evaluated. Am I closer or further? Did this year count? Did I make progress? And the measuring was invisible but constant, a background hum in the life you were otherwise living. At some point, and you cannot name the date, cannot identify a specific morning when it changed, the measuring grew quieter. The targets softened into something less like destinations and more like compass directions. You stopped asking whether you had arrived and started asking whether you were moving in a way that felt like you. That shift is not something you planned. It happened the way most inner changes happen, without announcement, without ceremony. Because the person you were becoming no longer needed the old framework in quite the same way. There are expectations that did not change, though. That is the part people sometimes forget when they talk about this. Not everything softened. Some things held their shape. A need to feel useful. A desire for moments of genuine connection. A belief that something about your life should matter to someone. These did not dissolve. They became, if anything, more concentrated. Like water that has boiled down to its essential self. Less volume, but more intensity. What you wanted became clearer, quieter, smaller, in the way that something becomes when it is finally stripped of what was never essential. You stopped expecting certain things and discovered you still very much expected others, only now the expecting felt less frantic, more rooted. The things that changed were often the things that were never really yours to begin with. Expectations inherited from the air around you, from what everyone seemed to be doing, from what success was supposed to look like at a certain age, from the quiet comparisons that accumulate over years of watching other people live their lives in public. These expectations sat alongside your own for a long time, and it took years to see which was which. The ones that stayed were yours. The ones that quietly released were not. And there is something in that release, when you can finally recognize it, that does not feel like loss at all. It feels like setting something down that you were never really meant to carry. Standing in the kitchen, late in the evening, not thinking about any of this directly, just standing, just being somewhere between one thing and the next, you feel the presence of all the versions of life you once expected. They are not gone. They are just no longer in front of you. They have moved to somewhere beside you, or behind, or folded in, to the texture of who you have become in the years since you first imagined them. And the person standing in the kitchen is not worse than the person who did the imagining. They are just more specific, more real, more aware that life is made of these ordinary moments. The standing, the quiet, the kitchen light, and not only of the arrivals you once pictured. The kitchen light is particular that way. the way it makes the late evening feel both small and complete. You are not waiting for anything in that moment. You are just there, which is its own kind of thing. And it is in these unremarkable moments that the full weight of changed expectations reveals itself. Not dramatically, not as grief, but as a kind of texture that is now part of you. You carry it the way you carry the knowledge of your age or the memory of a place you used to live, not actively, not consciously, but constantly. It is part of how you move through rooms, part of how you look at things, part of the particular color that years of living give to everything you see. You think sometimes about the person you were when the expectations were new. They had an energy that you recognize now as something specific to youth. Not better, not worse, just different in the way that unweathered things are different from things that have been through weather. There was a momentum in the early imagining, a sense that everything was ahead, that all the space was still open, that the future was a room you had not yet entered, and therefore could still arrange exactly as you wanted. You were going to arrange it carefully. You had plans for the furniture, you knew where everything would go, and then you entered the room and found that it had its own dimensions, its own fixed walls, its own light coming in from angles you had not anticipated. And you arranged what you could, and left the rest, and over time the room became yours anyway. Not the room you imagined, but yours. What no one tells you about changed expectations is that the change is not binary. It is not the case that you expected something, it did not happen, and you let it go. The process is far more gradual, far more textured than that. There are expectations you have half released, partially set down, but still held somewhere in the background, still occasionally picked back up and examined, still carrying a small charge. There are others you did not realize you had until they became impossible and you discovered them through their absence. And there are expectations you never had consciously, but that shaped your behavior for years all the same. The ones you absorbed from the world around you without choosing them, that lived in your decisions like invisible instructions until you finally started questioning why you were following them. The half-released ones are the most interesting. They are the plans that did not fail dramatically, but never quite resolved. The life that almost went a different direction, but turned here instead. The version of yourself that existed in a parallel logic. If this had happened, if that had been different, if the timing had aligned differently. These are not regrets exactly. They do not arrive with the weight of regret. They arrive more quietly, more curiously, like watching a road you did not take from the window of a moving car. You are not wishing you had turned. You are just noticing that the road exists, that it goes somewhere, that the person who would have turned is still somehow part of you, even though you kept driving, and the expectations that arrived through their absence. Those are the ones that take longest to understand. You did not know you expected to feel settled by a certain age until you were that age, and noticed the unsettledness. You did not know you expected a particular kind of closeness until you found yourself in its absence. You did not know you expected the future to feel more certain until the uncertainty became the dominant texture of each year. These expectations were not written down anywhere. They were not articulated. They existed only as assumptions. Invisible architecture, holding up the way you looked at time. until you looked more carefully and saw that the architecture was there, had always been there, and was now shifting. What shifts with it is the relationship to time itself. When expectations are new and held firmly, time is a vehicle moving toward them. Each year is progress or delay. You are either getting closer or falling behind. The expectations create a temporal structure, a way of measuring the movement of your life against a destination. When the expectations change, the temporal structure changes too. Time becomes less linear, less directional. It becomes more like weather, not something you are passing through toward an arrival, but something you are simply inside, that changes around you, that asks for nothing except your presence. This is disorienting at first. There is a period when the loss of direction feels like loss in general, but then something else emerges. A different relationship to the days, one less organized around destination, more attentive to what is actually here. Being more attentive to what is actually here is not the same as giving up. That is the confusion that sometimes settles around this kind of acceptance. That to release an expectation is to surrender, to admit failure, to stop caring. But releasing an expectation is not stopping caring. It is redirecting the caring toward something that can actually receive it. The expectation was a shape you were trying to pour yourself into. Releasing it is recognizing that you are not a liquid, and the shape was never permanent. What remains after the release is not emptiness. What remains is you, a little more directly, yourself, a little less filtered through what you thought the future was supposed to look like. The notebook on the shelf holds all of it. The handwriting is familiar. The plans are someone you were, and neither of these facts is a tragedy. The person who wrote those plans was real. The person reading them now is real. Between them is a life that moved through years and weather and other people and choices made under conditions that were never quite what anyone expected. And that is not a failed life. That is just a life. The expectations changed because lives do, because time does, because you do, and you are still here, still moving through rooms, still making sense of what you find in them. And the finding itself is something. The finding itself is something. You return to this, sitting somewhere quiet at the end of an ordinary day. Not the day you pictured when you were younger, not the life you drew in your mind with such confidence, but a day that happened, that had weight, that asked things from you, and received them. The notebook is back on the shelf. The plans inside it are not erased. They are just earlier. They are the record of a person who did not yet know what the years would bring, and who made pictures from that not knowing, and who was not wrong to make them. Every expectation was made by someone who was doing the best they could with what they knew. That is not foolishness. That is how people move into the future. They make shapes for it, and then the future arrives, and the shapes adjust, and the life continues. You look around the room you are in now. It is not the room from the picture. But you know where things are. You know the quality of the light at this hour. You know what the silence sounds like in here and what it means. This knowledge is not nothing. It is the accumulated texture of days that actually happened, of a life that was actually lived, of time that passed through you and left its mark. The expectations that changed were not taken from you. They grew into the shape of what turned out to be real, and what turned out to be real is here, in this room, in this quiet, in the particular way the evening is settling around you right now. The old notebook and the person reading it are not in opposition. They are parts of a continuous thing, a life moving through time, adjusting as it goes, carrying what it can, and setting down what it must, finding its way, not to the destination that was imagined, but to something that could only be discovered by living. And in the quiet of this room, in the ordinary wait of this evening, there is something that feels not like the arrival you pictured, but like the only kind of arrival that was ever really possible, the kind that happens slowly, without ceremony, in the middle of ordinary days, the kind that was happening all along, in every small adjustment, every quiet renegotiation, every morning you woke up and continued anyway, not toward the picture, just forward, just into whatever the next day was. And the expectations that changed along the way were not failures. They were evidence that you were moving, that something in you was willing to be changed by what you encountered, that you were, through all of it, alive to your own life in the only way that has ever been available, imperfectly, gradually, one ordinary evening at a time.